Welcome, travelers, to Adventures in Security. In this video, we explore the links in the cyber kill chain, assessing a threat actor's possible TTPs in each, and defensive TTPs to break the chain. You can download the video script, including the bibliography, from the link in the description. Why the cyber kill chain still matters. Today's starting point is simple but powerful. Most successful intrusions do not happen all at once. They unfold in stages. The cyber kill chain helps us see those stages in order, which matters because order creates dependency. An attacker cannot remotely control a victim system before establishing a foothold and cannot steal meaningful data before gaining access to the right systems and accounts. That is why this framework remains useful. It turns a complicated cyber incident into a story we can follow. That storytelling aspect matters because it makes cybersecurity less abstract. Instead of treating an attack as magic, we can ask concrete questions. How did the attacker learn about the target? How was the payload delivered? What let the code run? How did the actor keep access? Where could defenders have interrupted the sequence? The kill chain does not replace more detailed frameworks, and later in the video we will discuss its limits, but it gives us a clean way to organize thinking. The most important takeaway on this slide is that defenders do not need to be perfect everywhere. If they break one necessary link at the right time, the attacker's objective may fail completely. Here is the full cyber kill chain sequence. Reconnaissance is the research phase. The attacker gathers information about people, systems, domains, technologies, and routines. Weaponization is where that information is turned into a workable attack package, such as a malicious document, link, or software bundle. Delivery is the moment that package reaches the victim environment through email, the web, removable media, or another channel. Exploitation is the trigger point. A vulnerability is abused, a script runs, or a person is manipulated into taking an action that gives the attacker an opening. Installation comes next. The attacker places malware, a backdoor, or another persistence mechanism on the system so access survives beyond the first execution. Command and control, often shortened to C2, is the communication channel that lets the attacker remotely issue instructions and receive results. Finally, actions on objectives describes the real goal. Data theft, espionage, ransomware, sabotage, lateral movement, or another mission outcome. Notice that the later stages depend on success in the earlier stages. That dependency is exactly what gives defenders leverage. It also explains why strong control of the basics, patching, logging, hardening, filtering, and user training, still matters. Threat actor campaigns. A useful correction to popular culture is that threat actors usually behave less like movie villains and more like problem solvers with a goal. Cybercriminal groups want money. Espionage actors want information and long-term access. Hacktivists may want public visibility or disruption. Insiders may already have access and may not follow the sequence in quite the same way. Even so, most campaigns still involve planning, delivery, access, control, and objective achievement. That is why the kill chain works well as a first model. At the same time, it is not detailed enough by itself for modern defense. MITRE ATT&CK gives a more granular view by cataloging adversary tactics and techniques. NIST CSF 2.0 organizes cybersecurity outcomes at the program level, while NIST Incident Response Guidance helps organizations prepare, detect, contain, and recover. In practice, mature teams often combine all of them. They may use the kill chain to brief leadership, attack to tune detections, CSF 2.0 to align governance and risk management, and incident response playbooks to handle real events. The lesson is that frameworks are tools, not rivals. Good defenders choose the one that answers the question they are asking. Reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is the attacker's research phase. If you know how a target works, what software it uses, who holds authority, and when people are most likely to respond to messages, you can craft a much more effective attack. Threat actors often start with open-source intelligence. or OSINT, including social media posts, staff directories, conference programs, public documents, job postings, academic web pages, breach credential dumps, DNS records, domain registration data, and internet-facing service banners. Passive reconnaissance tries to stay quiet, while active footprinting uses probes and scans that may be detected by monitoring systems. Even ordinary information can be useful to an adversary. Faculty research interests, travel announcements, lab websites, departmental contact lists, and public PDFs that reveal software versions or naming conventions. Security teams break this link by managing their external attack surface, reviewing what the organization exposes online, controlling publication workflows for sensitive technical details, inventorying internet-facing assets, and teaching employees and students how operational details can be weaponized. Reconnaissance cannot be eliminated completely because public presence is part of doing business, but it can be made less useful, less accurate, and more costly for the attacker. Weaponization. Weaponization happens when the attacker turns planning into something operational. In the classic model, this means combining an exploit with a payload, such as a remote access Trojan, downloader info stealer, or ransomware loader. In modern environments, the payload may also be a fake login page, an OAuth consent scam, a malicious script, or a booby-trapped document that abuses macros, embedded content, or a reader vulnerability. One important point is that defenders often do not see this stage directly because it usually happens on the attacker's side, outside the victim environment. That means security teams break the link indirectly. They reduce exploitable conditions through patching, secure configuration, application control, and exploit mitigations. They also use protective technologies such as sandboxing and content disarm and reconstruction, or CDR, to remove risky active content from files before users ever receive them. Delivery. Delivery is the point where the attack package crosses into the victim environment. Email remains one of the most common channels because it naturally supports both links and attachments, and because people are conditioned to act quickly on messages that appear urgent or routine. But delivery is broader than phishing. Attackers also use compromised websites, malvertising, shared cloud documents, messaging platforms, software downloads, and removable media. Breaking this link requires layered controls. Email authentication standards such as SPF, DKIM, and DMARC help reduce spoofing. Secure email gateways, browser protections, file detonation, URL rewriting, and CDR reduce exposure to malicious content. User education matters too, but it works best when paired with easy reporting and rapid security team follow-up. An employee should know exactly how to report a suspicious message without fear of embarrassment. Delivery is also a good reminder that cybersecurity is partly technical and partly behavioral. A payload only succeeds if it reaches the target and looks credible enough to be trusted. Exploitation. Exploitation is the moment the attacker's effort becomes real on the victim's side. In traditional cases, exploitation means abusing a vulnerability in an operating system, browser, plug-in, or document reader so malicious code executes. But the idea is broader than software flaws. A fake login page that tricks a user into entering credentials is also exploiting a weakness, this time in trust and decision-making rather than memory management. Modern attackers frequently blur the line by combining both. They may deliver a document that asks the user to enable content, run a script that abuses legitimate system tools, or lure a user to an identity portal designed to capture tokens. Security teams break this link through aggressive patching, secure configuration baselines, reduced administrative privilege, attack surface reduction rules, exploit protection, multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, and strong browser and application control settings. This is also where visibility becomes critical. A well-run environment logs process launches, script execution, application crashes, blocked behaviors, and authentication anomalies. Those data points help defenders spot exploitation attempts, even if prevention fails. In other words, a mature defense assumes some triggers will occur and prepares both to block them and to notice them quickly. Installation? Installation is about staying power. After initial code execution, the attacker wants access that survives beyond the first moment of compromise. That may involve installing a remote access tool, placing a malicious DLL, creating scheduled tasks, adding startup items, modifying services, planting web shells, or abusing legitimate remote administration tools that are already present. Persistence is valuable because it buys time. With time, the attacker can survey the environment, identify privileged users, steal credentials, and move toward more valuable systems. Defenders break this link through endpoint detection and response, application allow listing, tamper protection, restricted administrative rights, script control, rapid host isolation, and monitoring for common persistence locations. Gold image management and reimaging strategies are also relevant, especially in large fleets such as student labs and shared devices. Installation is a stage where the basic principle of least privilege becomes concrete. If ordinary accounts cannot install software, register services, or alter key startup settings, then attacker options narrow sharply. This is also a good point to remind students that malware does not always look exotic. Sometimes installation is quiet, minimal, and carefully disguised as normal software behavior. Command and control. Command and control is the communication layer that turns compromise into sustained attacker control. A compromised device may beacon to an external server, receive tasks, upload results, or tunnel traffic through protocols that appear normal, such as HTTPS or DNS. This is why C2 detection is difficult. Security teams do not just look for obviously malicious traffic. They look for unusual destinations, odd timing patterns, rare user agent strings, mismatched certificates, repeated DNS queries, and connections that do not fit expected business behavior. When C2 succeeds, the attacker often gains what practitioners call hands-on keyboard access. That is the point where discovery, credential abuse, privilege escalation, and lateral movement accelerate. NIST Zero Trust guidance is especially relevant here because it emphasizes continual authentication, authorization, device posture evaluation, and constrained access rather than implicit trust based on network location. Network segmentation, egress filtering, DNS security monitoring, proxy inspection, and anomaly-based analytics can all help break this link. Even if an attacker compromises one endpoint, they should not automatically gain broad freedom to move or communicate. A good mental model is containment by design. The attacker reaches one room, but the rest of the building does not open automatically. Actions on objectives. Actions on objectives is the business end of the intrusion. This is where the attacker pursues the outcome that motivated the campaign in the first place. In an espionage case, that may mean collecting research data, contracts, student records, or credentials. In a ransomware case, it may mean staging data for exfiltration, encrypting files, and then using extortion pressure. In a destructive operation, it may involve wiping systems or corrupting data. Some actors also use one compromised system as a launch point for movement towards something more valuable. By this stage, the incident is already serious, but defenders still have meaningful opportunities. Data loss prevention tools, privilege access controls, segmentation, strong backups, storage snapshots, rapid containment procedures, and practiced incident response can dramatically reduce damage. NIST incident response guidance is helpful here because it frames the work not only as detection, but also as coordinated containment, eradication, recovery, and continuous improvement. One important lesson is that late-stage defense is not a sign of failure. It is part of resilience. Mature organizations plan for the possibility that some attacks will get through and invest in making the final objective harder to achieve, easier to detect, and quicker to recover from. Now, let's bring it all together. The kill chain becomes most useful when it stops being a vocabulary list and starts guiding control design. Good security teams ask what they can do before, during, and after each link. Before means prevention and hardening. During means detection and rapid action. After means containment, recovery, and learning. The model also helps teams avoid a common mistake: over-investing in a single class of defenses. If an organization spends heavily on email filtering but neglects endpoint visibility, privilege management, and egress monitoring, the attacker may still complete the later stages. This figure illustrates an important pattern. Defenders often have their cheapest and broadest leverage on the left side of the chain, especially during reconnaissance, delivery, and exploitation. But later controls remain essential, because real organizations are never perfect. This is where attack, CSF 2.0, Zero Trust, Incident Response, and System Security Engineering all complement the kill chain. Together, they support a security program that is layered, measurable, and designed to improve over time rather than react only after damage appears. The cyber kill chain is valuable precisely because it is easy to understand, but that same simplicity creates blind spots. Modern attacks do not always move in a neat straight line. Cloud identity abuse, token theft, OAuth misuse, insider activity, and supply chain compromise can compress or blur the classic stages. In some cases, the attacker never installs traditional malware at all. They simply abuse valid credentials and legitimate services. The model is also less detailed than attack, so it is not the best tool for writing precise detections or mapping every observed technique. Another limitation is that defenders often cannot see weaponization directly because it takes place outside their network. That means they must infer and prepare rather than observe and block. None of these limitations make the framework useless. They just tell us how to use it correctly. The kill chain is excellent for explaining attacker progression, teaching newcomers, briefing leaders, and identifying broad control opportunities. For detailed engineering and operations, it should be paired with attack for technique-level insight, CSF 2.0, for risk management outcomes, Zero Trust for access architecture, and formal incident response guidance for coordinated action. Good analysts know the difference between a helpful model and a complete answer. That's it for this video. If you learned anything, please remember to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And until next time, be careful what you click.